Beneath the velvet night sky, the ocean stretches endlessly, its waves colliding against jagged rocks in a rhythm older than memory. Gulls cry faintly in the distance, their voices carried like lost prayers over black waters. For centuries, sailors have trusted these sounds, the sea's lullabies that remind them of both danger and safety. And yet, along one lonely shore, there stands a lighthouse that should have gone dark long ago. Its lantern has not been tended for decades, its walls crumbling against the salt and wind. But still there are those who swear they've seen its beacon flicker through storms, guiding them home when no other light could. A place abandoned yet alive, a warning yet a promise. Tonight we step closer to its mystery. What happens when the very light meant to protect begins calling sailors back?
Even after death?
When the lighthouse was first built, it was hailed as a triumph against the ocean's cruelty. The cliffs on that stretch of coastline had swallowed countless ships, their broken hulls left splintered like bones at the foot of the rocks. The structure rose like a promise, a tower of stone meant to protect sailors from the sea's hunger. And within its walls lived the first keeper, a quiet man chosen for his steadiness, for the patience required to endure long months alone with only the waves for company. His life followed a rhythm as steady as the tides. At dusk he climbed the winding staircase, oil lantern in hand, to ignite the beacon that cast its glow over the restless waters. He recorded ship movements carefully in his log, marking names, times, and weather as though each detail mattered to the survival of men he might never meet. By morning, he would check the tower's windows, polish the glass, and make repairs battered by salt and storm. In the evenings, he often sat on the outer steps, listening to the crash of waves far below, his pipe smoke curling into the endless night. For a time, the work seemed simple. But isolation on the cliff is not silence. It is something else entirely. On windless nights, when the sea lay still as black glass, he began to hear things he could not explain. Whispers carried upward as though men were speaking just beyond the spray. He told himself it was nothing. Tricks of air, echoes rebounding against the stone. Yet more than once he swore the voices spoke his name. The noises did not stop there. Sometimes, as he sat writing in his logbook, there came a knock at the tower's wooden door. At first soft, then louder, insistent, as though a sailor desperate to escape the storm had come seeking shelter. But when he opened it, only night air pressed against him.
No footprints marked the dirt.
No visitor had come. Soon his habits began to shift. The keeper found himself compelled to stand at the gallery rail, staring endlessly out to sea. Hours passed as though minutes, his lantern long extinguished beside him. He claimed he saw lights on the horizon, shimmering glows where no ship should be, appearing and vanishing with the blink of an eye. Other nights, he said, the sea itself seemed to watch him back, its surface alive with something more than waves. Neighbors in the distant village, when they rode out with supplies, noticed the change in him. His eyes were ringed with sleepless shadows. His once meticulous log entries grew erratic, filled with half-written sentences, stray marks that trailed off like interrupted thoughts. Yet the beacon above them always burned faithfully,
never failing to pierce the night. And then,
one evening, the lantern glowed brighter than ever before, its beam cutting across a storm that threatened to drag ships onto the rocks. Sailors would later swear that light saved them, a ray so vivid it seemed almost unnatural. But when the storm cleared and villagers climbed the path to deliver food, the keeper was gone. His coat remained by the door, his boots tucked neatly beside his bed. The stairwell lantern was lit, its flame steady, and at the very top, the great light still turned, sweeping across the water as though someone tended it. For 3 nights, the beacon burned without pause.
no man refueled it.
No hand trimmed the wick, yet it shone on, brighter than ever. When at last it dimmed, the room was found empty, the logbook left open on a page with no words. Only a single wet handprint marked the paper, dripping with salt. The villagers began to whisper then that the lighthouse had claimed its first soul, and once the sea had taken one keeper, it would never stop calling for more. They say grief can bend reality, shaping the world into something that reflects the ache within. For one woman in the village below the cliffs, grief became light itself. Her husband was a sailor, a man swallowed by a storm that rolled in without warning. His ship was declared lost, his name etched quietly among those who never came home. Yet on nights when the waves roared loudest, the widow would walk the shoreline with a lantern clutched to her chest, whispering his name into the wind. Weeks after his disappearance, she claimed she saw something no one else could explain. Standing on the cliff's edge, she swore the lighthouse, dark for years after the keeper vanished, had flickered to life. A faint glow pierced the storm, its beams sweeping across the water in slow arcs.
And in that glow she saw her husband's ship.
Not wrecked, not splintered, but sailing steady, heading toward her as though the ocean itself had granted her prayer. The villagers dismissed her vision as sorrow's cruelty, a mind conjuring comfort where none could be found. But she was not the only one. Days later, another crew anchored in the harbour, their captain pale as he spoke of a strange light guiding them safely past the rock. He pointed to the crumbling tower above, claiming its glow had been their salvation when compasses failed. His men nodded, their eyes carrying the weight of something they could not dismiss. Whispers spread quickly. Some said the widow's grief was so strong it relit the lantern. Others claimed her husband's spirit returned to keep watch, unwilling to let the sea claim more lives. Children dared each other to climb the cliffs, waiting in the dark to see if the glow would return. Some swore they saw it flicker, others saw nothing, but none left without a shiver buried deep in their bones. The widow herself was never seen without her small lantern after that night. She kept it burning even in daylight, the flame steady as though it fed on something more than oil. People began to notice strange patterns. Whenever her lantern burned, sailors returned with stories of phantom lights. And when she finally passed, the village held its breath, watching the cliff. Some swore the great tower lit itself in morning, one final beacon cast across the waves before darkness reclaimed it. No one has ever proved whether the widow saw what she claimed, or whether others truly witnessed the glow. But the story persisted, carried by sailors who whispered it to one another on endless nights at sea. It blurred into folklore, into a question left hanging like salt in the air. Can grief reach so far into the unknown that it bends the elements themselves? Can a broken heart relight a beacon that should have remained forever dark? For every sailor who left the harbour, there was always a chance he would not return. The sea is a gambler, and it takes what it pleases. Families grew used to loss, their grief written into generations of weathered faces and empty chairs at supper tables. But what unsettled the village most were the stories of those who did return. Men who had already been mourned, buried in memory, and yet somehow walked the docks again. The first account came on a windless night when the tide was low. A fisherman swore he saw his cousin step off a vessel that had gone down months before. The man was drenched, salt clinging to his skin like frost, his hair plastered with seawater. He carried no nets, no gear, only the silence of the drowned. The witness called his name, but the sailor only turned his head slightly, eyes hollow, before vanishing into the fog that curled around the piers. By morning, no footprints remained. Others followed. In taverns along the coast, whispers told of figures staggering onto the shoreline long after storms claimed their ships. These sailors were always the same: salt, stained, pale, their clothes heavy with brine. They never spoke, never sought out loved ones, never touched the life they had once known. Some were glimpsed approaching their own doorsteps, stopping short as though an invisible hand pulled them back toward the cliffs. A wife once woke to the sound of dripping water outside her window and swore she saw her drowned husband standing in the yard. But when she rushed out, lantern trembling in her grasp, there was nothing left but wet soil where no rain had fallen. Each sighting, when traced back,
led to the same eerie coincidence. They occurred on nights when the phantom light was said to burn in the ruined tower.
Old sailors whispered that the beacon was not guiding ships but souls, leading them toward shore only to remind them that home was no longer theirs. It was not salvation, but a cruel tether. One of the most chilling testimonies came from a group of dock workers. They claimed to have seen an entire line of men,
6 in total,
walking off a vessel no one else could see. Their boots echoed on the planks, dripping seawater with each step. The workers stood frozen as the men moved silently toward the village road. One figure paused, staring back at them with lifeless eyes before all 6 dissolved into mist. The dock smelled of salt for days afterward, though no tide had risen to reach it. Folklore grew from these accounts, binding fear into a legend. Parents told children to stay inside on nights when the lighthouse flickered, warning that to look too closely might invite the dead to follow them home. Sailors muttered prayers before voyages, begging that if they were to perish, the light would not drag them back for one final mockery. To return once was natural. To return twice was a curse, and yet there were always skeptics. Men who claimed it was only fog or trickery of lanterns. But those same men refused to walk the cliffs on nights when the sea glowed faintly, as though reflecting something more than the moon. Their bravado ended at the boundary between land and water, where the lighthouse loomed like a sentinel that answered to no living master. The stories never found resolution. Each one ended in silence, in the eerie absence of closure. Families who believed they saw their lost loved ones could never hold them, never speak with them, never bring them back inside their homes. They were offered only a glimpse, a cruel shadow of return, as though the sea enjoyed reminding them of what it had taken. And so the reputation spread among mariners far beyond that coast. The lighthouse was not simply a landmark, it was a threshold, a place where the line between the drowned and the living blurred under a pale, shifting light. Sailors began to whisper its name like a warning, a cursed waypoint on the map of their journeys. For if the sea could give them back for a moment, it was only to prove that it owned them forever. It began as a whisper among navigators, the kind of rumor passed quietly in harbors after a few drinks. Ships were veering off course, not wildly, but with just enough strangeness to raise suspicion. Captains swore they followed their charts faithfully, yet their vessels would drift toward the cliffs where the old lighthouse stood, as though drawn by an invisible thread. The unsettling part was not the mistake itself, but the consistency. Each time, no matter the weather, the pull was always the same. Compass needles were the first to betray their crews. In calm seas they spun without warning, pointing nowhere, then slowly realigning not north, but toward the black outline of the ruined tower. Experienced sailors, men who had crossed oceans, cursed under their breath as their instruments contradicted the stars overhead. The seas playing tricks, they muttered, though their eyes betrayed the unease they dared not voice. When navigational logs were later compared, patterns emerged. Pages inked by different hands on different nights carried near. Identical entries, sudden deviations in course, bearings that made no sense, speeds that failed to match distance traveled. In some logs, the handwriting trembled, as if the men recording knew they were documenting something beyond human control. What unsettled investigators most was how the anomalies often occurred when the lighthouse should have been dark. Yet the records showed a phantom fixation. The sea was pulling them toward a beacon that did not exist. Some crews insisted they saw faint light on the horizon, no brighter than a candle flame. Others denied any glow, saying only that their ships leaned toward the cliffs as if the water itself had chosen the route. Skeptics blamed shifting currents, or the magnetic veins of rock beneath the sea. But those explanations faltered when compasses misbehaved miles away in waters where no rock should have interfered. The ocean, it seemed, did not need logic to command obedience. Cartographers refused to draw these diversions on maps, fearful of legitimizing the pattern. Instead, the details lived in hushed warnings, in extra ink strokes on personal journals, never meant for official eyes, a map that no one dared to publish, but every sailor carried in memory. Perhaps the sea does not forget. Perhaps it keeps its own records, carved not on paper but into currents and winds that slip through human hands. And in those records, the old lighthouse is still alive, still calling, whether men wish to answer or not. Storms are nothing new to sailors. They are the old enemies of the sea, arriving without mercy, tearing canvas to ribbons, splintering wood as if it were kindling. But the storms off the cliffs of the lighthouse seem to hold something else within their fury, something almost deliberate, as though the sky itself conspired with the sea to drag men beneath the waves. Survivors, when they returned to tell their stories, often spoke with trembling hands and eyes that refused to meet anyone's gaze. They described nights when the horizon vanished, swallowed by curtains of black water that rose higher than the tallest masts. Winds shrieked like banshees, tearing ropes from sailors' hands, leaving them clinging to whatever they could grasp.
Lightning carved jagged scars into the sky,
revealing only chaos, decks awash with seawater, men sliding across planks slick with salt and blood, ships groaning as if alive and dying, and yet, in the very heart of these storms, when every star was smothered and even the moon abandoned them, a light would appear, sometimes faint, sometimes impossibly bright, always steady. Sailors swore it cut through the storm like a blade, a glimmer of hope promising safety beyond the cliffs. They would turn their wheels toward it, desperate for salvation, and more than once, that light guided them out of certain death. One fisherman told how his small vessel was all but swallowed, the mast snapping like a twig. In his final moment, as water closed over him, he caught sight of the glows sweeping across the waves. Somehow, impossibly, it led him to calmer waters. He washed ashore miles away, half drowned, his boat shattered, but alive. "The lighthouse saved me," he rasped, though the tower had not burned in decades. Another account came from a merchant crew who insisted their ship had followed the beacon through walls of rain. Each man swore the same thing: the light did not falter once, though no fuel had fed it in years. They docked safely at the harbour, shaken but grateful. Yet within a week, 3 of them vanished at sea during calm weather, their replacements swearing the same route held no danger at all. It was as if the sea had merely postponed its claim. Patterns emerged. The phantom beacon seemed to offer reprieve in storms too violent for survival, pulling men away from wreckage at the very edge of doom. But those who followed it often met strange ends afterward, not in tempests but on gentle seas beneath clear skies. They were found adrift in empty boats or never seen again. The survivors who told these tales could never answer the same haunting question: had the light saved them, or had it marked them for later? Even the bravest captains confessed unease. Some swore they would rather take their chances with the storm than trust a glow that belonged to no living keeper. Others admitted they prayed for its return when death was near, bargaining that perhaps even a cursed light was better than none at all. The contradiction gnawed at them. Was the beacon an angel in disguise, or a lure to ensure no man escaped the ocean's hunger entirely? No logbook, no chart, no witness could settle the matter. Only one truth remained: the storms near the cliffs carried not just wind and rain, but a choice sailors could never truly understand. By the early 20th century, most lighthouses had long abandoned their reliance on oil, embracing the steady convenience of electricity, but not this one. The man assigned to tend it was old, fashioned, or perhaps cautious. Some whispered. He distrusted wires and switches, believing that light should come from flame, that a living fire could push back the things darkness carried. So while other towers gleamed with modern bulbs, he trimmed wicks and carried canisters of oil up the spiral staircase, the same way keepers had done for centuries. His journals, later recovered, showed the discipline of a man devoted to routine. The entries began simple: notes on weather, wave height, passing ships, and the inevitable complaints about solitude. Yet as months turned to years, a shift began. His handwriting grew less steady, his lines less precise. "Whispers," he scrawled one night. "Not from outside, from within the walls. They climb the stairs when the wind is still." He described the sound of footsteps rising from below, deliberate, heavy, as if boots soaked with seawater were trudging toward him. Sometimes they stopped just outside the lantern room. Other times they circled endlessly, as though waiting for him to open the door. He never found anyone there. He never wanted to. At first, he ignored them. But the voices grew persistent, calling faintly up the spiral with words he could almost understand. His notes darkened. "They know my name now." Another week. "They are patient, but they will not leave." And then came the final entry. Unlike the others, it sprawled across the page in hurried strokes, ink blotched as if his hand shook violently. He wrote, "They called again tonight. I will not pretend any more. I answered them." The next line broke off in the middle of a word, the pen dragged downward as though ripped from his grasp. No further entries followed. When inspectors eventually arrived to check on him, they found the tower empty. The lantern was still burning, its flame steady and strong, but no keeper remained. His boots and coat lay neatly by the bunk. His logbook sat open on the desk, damp to the touch, though no leak had entered the room. Its pages smelled of brine, and faint white crystals of salt clung to the paper. It was as if the journal itself had been pulled from the ocean and set carefully in its place. The villagers whispered that the old keeper had broken an unspoken rule. One must never answer when the sea speaks. It does not call out of kindness. It does not climb the stairs to offer company. To acknowledge it is to invite it closer, to let it take something back with it when it returns to the waves. His disappearance cemented the lighthouse's reputation, no longer just a ruin on the cliff. It became a wound in the coastline, a place where men could be swallowed whole without leaving so much as a ripple. And though the keeper's name faded from memory, his last words lived on, a warning etched into every story told afterward. Time has a way of softening legends, turning them into stories whispered for entertainment rather than warnings. But around the cliffs where the lighthouse still stands, the line between story and encounter has never fully blurred away. Even in the modern age with GPS and satellite imaging, sailors report the same strange phenomenon, a light sweeping across the horizon where no beacon should exist. Coast Guard logs quietly note incidents where vessels adjusted course toward the cliffs, guided by a glow their instruments never detected. Some officers admitted they saw it with their own eyes, faint but steady, only to find the tower dark when they approached. Their official reports were careful, clinical, but between themselves they called it the ghost light. Tourists who brave the hike up the cliffside ruins tell similar tales. Many arrive with phones ready, hoping to catch proof of the phantom glow. Some manage to record a flicker on the horizon, a pale arc sweeping across the black water. But inevitably, their devices glitch. Batteries draining in seconds, footage corrupting, screens freezing at the exact moment the light appears. A few claimed their phones continued to feel damp even hours later, as though seawater had seeped through unseen cracks. Locals rarely climb the cliffs anymore. They say it's not worth the risk, that the tower holds something best left alone. For them, the lighthouse is not a tourist attraction, but a scar, a reminder that the sea doesn't forget its debts. To walk near it is to invite attention you may not want, and yet that warning only makes the place more alluring for outsiders. Thrill. Seekers sneak through the ruins at night, daring one another to wait for the flicker. Some laugh it off when nothing happens. Others descend pale and quiet, unwilling to speak of what they saw. One group of campers reported waking to a beam of light cutting through their tent walls, though the sky was overcast and the cliffs lay silent. When they tried to leave at dawn, they found their compass needles spinning, their GPS devices locked in endless searching loops. Only when the morning sun rose fully did their equipment return to normal. These modern echoes suggest the past is not buried. Technology cannot dispel what lingers here. If anything, it falters in its presence. The light continues, adapting, bending itself into the age of satellites and smartphones just as easily as it once bent oil lamps and compasses. The dead, it seems, have no intention of surrendering their claim, which leaves us to wonder, why here? Why this crumbling tower, this patch of unforgiving sea? Perhaps the lighthouse is more than stone and glass. Perhaps it is a gathering place for souls who cannot rest, a point on the map the living may try to erase, but the ocean refuses to forget. A lighthouse is more than stone and flame. To the sailor, it is a promise carved against the night, a reminder that someone is watching, that land is near, that survival is still possible. Yet, it is also a symbol of solitude, perched on cliffs where no one lingers long, where keepers lived lives defined by silence. In that contrast, safety and loneliness, lies the strange psychology of the beacon. It is both comfort and warning, salvation and prison. Perhaps that is why the human mind clings to it so fiercely. In the chaos of the sea, the eye searches desperately for light, any light to prove that it is not lost. The darkness is vast and merciless, and so the faintest glow becomes more than a signal. It becomes hope itself. Hope strong enough to be seen even when it should not exist. It is no wonder that sailors caught between fear and survival would imagine a lantern sweeping across the horizon where no keeper remains. But imagination alone may not explain what so many have sworn to witness. There is grief tied to that tower, grief that has soaked into its stones like salt water. Widows waiting at the shoreline, children who grew old without fathers, keepers who vanished into the tide. These sorrows do not vanish, they echo. Perhaps what flickers above the ruins is not fire, but memory, a collective ache bright enough to bend perception. To see a light that should not burn is to see the weight of loss itself projected onto the night. There are those who say it is guilt that fuels the glow. Sailors carry heavy burdens. The comrades they could not save, the ships lost under their command, the prayers unanswered in the roar of the storm. A lighthouse represents what could have been different, the guiding flame that might have turned tragedy aside. Maybe that phantom light is their remorse, conjured not only by those who returned to port, but by those who never left the sea at all. And then there is the possibility of even more chilling, that the light is not imagined at all, that it belongs to those who refused to let go, sailors unwilling to surrender their duty even in death. A keeper bound to his staircase, a drowned captain still steering his men home, a widow's lantern burning beyond her final breath. The sea may claim the body, but not always the will. And so the beacon endures, not fueled by oil or wire, but by the stubbornness of souls. We may never truly know. The mind invents, grief lingers, guilt corrodes, spirits persist. In the end, the light remains, untethered to any single cause, answering only to the horizon. Some mysteries, perhaps, are meant to keep us searching. And when the night grows long and the waters grow dark, it may be enough to know that even if the flame is only in our minds, it is still there, calling us home. The sea has always been a place of endings and beginnings, of arrivals and disappearances. For those who sail upon it, the horizon is both promise and threat, a line that hides whatever waits beyond. And yet, through all the years of wrecks and rescues, one constant has remained: the belief in a light that will guide them back. A beacon, steadfast, even when no keeper stands to tend its flame. The lighthouse on the cliff should have been silent long ago, reduced to stone and shadow. Its lantern should be nothing more than rusted metal, its glass clouded with salt and time. And yet the stories continue. Sailors swear they see it flare in storms, tourists whisper about flickers caught in the corner of their vision, and locals still avoid the ruins as if the beam might find them. Whether grief, guilt, or something that defies explanation, the glow endures. Perhaps that is the truth of it, that the sea does not yield so easily to our desire for closure. It remembers, it carries the weight of every lost ship, every last cry swallowed by the waves, every promise never fulfilled. And the lighthouse, perched like a sentinel above it all, serves as a reminder that some bonds are stronger than death, to guide, to protect, to call the wandering home. These duties do not vanish simply because the keeper is gone. There is something haunting, yet oddly comforting, in this thought, that no sailor truly disappears without trace, that even if the ocean claims their body, there remains a path, faint, flickering but present, that leads them back to shore.
Home may not be the house they left behind, or the family waiting at the dock.
Home may be something stranger, quieter, somewhere beyond the living, but still, the light calls. And so the stories will continue, carried in salt air and whispered across tavern tables, told by those who fear the tower and by those who long for it. The phantom beacon has become more than a mystery. It is a symbol of endurance, of connection that death cannot sever. When the sea grows dark and the waves rise high, when compasses fail and hope thins, the thought of that glow on the horizon may be the only thing that keeps a sailor steady. So, if you ever find yourself standing on a deserted shore at night, staring out across the vast black ocean, and a distant flicker touches the edge of your vision, do not dismiss it too quickly. You may not be alone. Perhaps it is memory or grief, or only your mind's invention. Or perhaps it is the lighthouse reaching across time and tide to remind you of what still lingers. The light has not gone out. The sea is not forgotten. The lighthouse is waiting,